Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And as we have seen today, our annual discussion about the threats to the homeland is full of threats. It's a busy time for all of you, and I want to start by thanking the men and women who work for you, and I hope you will pass along our respect and support for them. We rely on them, as Senator Paul has just indicated, to keep us all safe and keep our communities safe. And at the state and local level, but also the people who you represent here today. We've got a lot of threats. We're in the middle of a presidential election, and there are, foreign actors trying to intervene in our election again. That's a threat. We're experiencing these protests in the wake of the tragic deaths of George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, and other events. As I've repeated many times, of course, I support people's right to protest peacefully. It's protected by our Constitution. I also support police reform, and it was discussed earlier that, some things have been blocked around here. We actually had a police reform bill that was very common sense and had a lot of provisions that were very appealing on a bipartisan basis. It was blocked, even from consideration by the other side. I think that's cynical, and I think we should have had that debate and discussion, and we should have passed something, including, some ideas that Senator Paul just talked about. But I got to tell you, the riots, and particularly the damage to our communities, the arson, the looting, the desecration of property. By the way, when I say our communities, often these are communities of color. And nothing, upsets me more than seeing the entrepreneur in one of these communities, like the African-American guy in Ohio, or the Hispanic woman I've seen in other news broadcasts who says, I spent my life building this business, and now it's been destroyed. And of course, the harm to individuals, to citizens, and particularly the violence against federal, state, and local officers. Director Ray said it was heartbreaking, and I think that's a good way to put it. These people are doing their job. And, by the way, they get paid very little compared to what a lot of people are getting paid around this place, or frankly, even some of the demonstrators who are assaulting them. Taking out their frustrations on these guys is not fair. It's unacceptable. I want to again express my condolences for Dave Underwood. He was one of yours, DHS Protective Service officer who was killed while trying to protect the courthouse in Oakland, California. 300 injuries we heard today. Over 300 injuries have been sustained in Portland. Of course, we wish all those officers a speedy recovery, including getting their sight back and their hearing back. And it was just discussed that 2 officers were shot last night. And these 2 officers, of course, we all wish them a speedy recovery. But to their families, you talk about trying to recruit people into this business. Wow. I wonder what their families think about that. I actually was with a family recently. It was 2 weeks ago. I was in Cleveland, Ohio, at a visitation for Officer Jimmy Skirnovitz. And Jimmy was one of your guys in a way. Officer Skirnovitz was working with the FBI and working with state and local law enforcement, Cleveland Police Detective, on a violent crime task force, Operation Legend. He was gunned down in his car by 3 teenagers, unprovoked, just gunned down in his car. And his family was incredible. I mean, they were so courageous in response to this, and so committed to the notion that Jimmy died in service to his country, which is exactly what he wanted to do in life. And God bless him. It's like talking to the families of our military who have fallen. But this violence must stop. This, too, is a threat to our homeland. We've talked today, as Director Miller has said, that the terrorist groups, Al-Qaeda, ISIS, and others continue on the attack. That's a threat. We cannot forget. We cannot take our eye off the ball. As we've heard from CISA here in this committee, consistently these cyber attacks are on the rise. And by the way, this committee has focused on that a lot and will continue to. We did a permanent subcommittee investigations recently about this issue, and I think, as you know, Deputy Secretary Cuccinelli, I'm very concerned about the FISMA implementation in some of our federal agencies. They're just not doing it. They're not protecting themselves, which means they're not protecting the taxpayers, not protecting the government. And we're going to have some legislation on that, but we've got to work together to put the firewalls in place more effectively. So many other, I'm going to ask about 3 specific threats quickly. The first of which is these transnational terror groups, in essence, that are shipping poison into our communities. And they keep doing it. And it's increased. And I'm pleased that 4 million pounds of hard drugs have been recently apprehended, you know, crystal meth, heroin, cocaine, and so on. And I do believe that the ultimate answer to this issue lies on the demand side, and we've done a lot here. You know, we've spent over $5 billion of additional federal money just in the last few years on prevention, on treatment services, on longer-term recovery, and we got to keep that up. And unfortunately, we've seen a reversal during the COVID period the last several months on overdose and overdose deaths after finally getting to the point where we were making progress on that. 20% reduction in Ohio in 2018 of overdose deaths after 3 decades of increases. But now we're going the other way. So we got to deal with the supply side too, because when it flows into this country, this poison, it's cheaper. It's more accessible. And I want to focus just for a second on fentanyl. We know it mostly comes from China. We know it mostly comes by the mail. The STOP Act, you know, you all worked with us on that legislation. We got it passed. It's supposed to keep this stuff from coming in from China. Just quickly, how do you think it's working? And I know on either side of the panel here, we've got a lot of experience with the STOP Act. How's it working from a Customs and Border Protection point of view and from an FBI point of view?
Well, from a CBP point of view, this is, you know, they've started aggressively pursuing small package inspections at a level that we have not done before, and that has proven fruitful. Of course, our adversaries adjust. They tend to be adjusting by going through Mexico. That's their path of adjustment that we're observing. But we're going to keep up the pressure in that space. If for no other reason, it's like my comments earlier about driving people to the ports of entry. If we can minimize their opportunity points, we can focus our efforts, all of us together, on those avenues of approach that we know they are using. And we do need the help of this body to continue that effort. And I know that the commitment is there. I know especially on this sort of particular issue, Senator, you've been very strong for a long time, and we very much appreciate that at DHS.
Well, let's keep the STOP Act in place. I think you're absolutely right, and it's not coming by mail from Mexico, as I understand it, as much as it's coming overland, although some of both, so the STOP Act helped there too. I know I'm getting close to over my time, and Mr. Chairman, I don't know if you would mind giving me a chance just quickly to ask about the 2 other threats, and we'll get back to you, Director Wray, in writing, if that's okay. One is safeguarding our research, and I love what you said about the greatest transfer of wealth in the history of the world. This threat from China and other countries who have systematically targeted our research and the most promising researchers is a threat to the homeland. It really is. And I guess what I would say is, with this new legislation that came out of this committee, Chairman marked it up. It's gone to the floor in the sense as part of a proposal by Senator McConnell. Safeguarding American Innovation Act, would that help you, Director Wray, to do your job? You say you have opened every 10 hours another China-related investigation, 2,500 open investigations. This, as you know, provides you a new criminal fraud charge under Title 18. Would that give you the tools and help you to be able to protect the homeland from this threat?
Well, Senator, I very much appreciate the legislation. We do think it will help. I want to just underscore some of the points that you've made there. I mean, from our perspective, and I've said this repeatedly and publicly since pretty early in my tenure as FBI Director, that there is no adversary that presents a broader and more comprehensive threat to our democratic ideas, our innovation, our economic security than the government of China. We're up about 1,300% in terms of economic espionage investigations that tie back to China over the past decade. 2,000 plus active investigations tied back to the government of China, by far the biggest chunk of our counterintelligence portfolio. China sees itself on the issues that you're raising in terms of research as engaged in an international talent war. And so we have this perverse phenomenon where you've got essentially a pipeline of U.S. technology, intellectual property, and research back to China for their nationalistic purposes, essentially misappropriating U.S. taxpayer dollars in the process. So I appreciate the leadership you've shown through legislation and otherwise on this topic. We're trying to tackle it through investigations. I think we've had about a talent plan arrest a month almost this year. It covers almost every region of the country. We're also very concerned about China's military-civil fusion policy, where essentially they overtly are focused on channeling even what might appear to be civilian research, intellectual property, and innovation back to advance their military aims. And as one illustration of that, as certain members of this committee may know, we've now recently started discovering PLA researchers here in this country who were concealing
People's Liberation Army.
their ties back to the PLA. And so that's a real concern as well. So this is a major, major issue, and it's our highest counterintelligence priority for a reason, because it's going to shape what this country is like in 25 or 30 years.
Well, my time has expired, and I appreciate your indulgence, Mr. Chairman. Let me just say this. Your personal commitment to this is very much appreciated, and it wasn't always so at the FBI. As you know, when we had our hearing after our year-long investigation, it was shocking what we learned, and the FBI, to their credit, testified and said, basically, we've been asleep at the switch on this for a while, 2 decades, and we need to increase what we're doing in terms of prosecutions and investigations, and boy, they have. So DOJ and FBI has really stepped up. And unfortunately, it's absolutely necessary. So my last question for you, Mr. Cuccinelli, was about the nonprofit security grant program. I'm going to follow up with you in writing about that. We appreciate the additional funding. We think it's working. We've got some good experience back home with groups that are not just getting the funding, but they're getting your expertise. They're getting the best practices. They're getting the professional help as to how to protect themselves. These are synagogues and churches and mosques, and pushing back against the domestic terrorism threat, including Islamic extremists and white supremacists. So we thank you for your support of that program. We hope we continue. I know you've got a new grant program you're looking at that we'll follow up with. So with that, thank you, gentlemen, very much, and thank you, Mr. Chairman, for your indulgence.